But being able to see whether your features are going to exceed player expectations, meet them, and why, and being able to express that with the design team together. That's the product side of things, right?
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Sam Sharma. Sam is currently the Director of Product at Bungie, working on Destiny 2. His experience includes roles as an executive producer and senior producer at some of the biggest studios in the world like EA, Ubisoft, and Guerrilla Games on titles like FIFA, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Far Cry 6. Today, we'll be talking about his journey into games, a peek into the inner workings of AAA studios, and how comic books inspired him as a kid growing up. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 7 of season 4 of the Zero to Play podcast. All right, welcome Sam to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so
that's a lovely intro track, by the way. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, it definitely gets me into the mood every time. But you being on the show is definitely a really important experience for me. One, because you've worked in production in your career, and you currently work at Bungie, which is, I think a dream company for a lot of people growing up that have grown up and want to work at one day. So I think there's a lot of value that you can share there. And just working as a director of product, I think, is really fascinating. And in my experience, I've only ever worked with producers and executive producers, and I'm not quite familiar as to how a director of product fits into that kind of mix and that hierarchy. Do you mind explaining a little bit about how that fits and like who maybe you report to, who you manage, and how that kind of works, if you can go into detail about that?
Of course, yeah. Obviously, I can't go into the inner workings of Bungie too much, but
Totally.
Bungie is a really unique company. They've structured themselves more around the product that they're making, Destiny, and then every year they improve that process. So a long time ago, my current manager, he joined and he sort of started the product management function in Bungie, really, and he's now the senior director and he manages like the entire portfolio. My job is I'm part of what is called the Destiny leadership team, and there's a bunch of leaders in there, like the creative directors that work on different aspects of the game, the production directors, and it's a tough balance to make a creatively and narratively resonant game, which I do believe Bungie does with Destiny, and make sure that as a free-to-play game, the business is still running and is successful and is and is speaking to the right consumers and is tugging at the right heartstrings when we tell the narrative, and like learning about what our players are doing and how they're sort of what content is really resonating with them and what are they playing more, what are they playing less, and using that to drive decisions for a live game overall. And the director of product kind of straddles that line, or director of product management straddles that line. So there's we have the season pass, which every season there's a new story that we tell, and there's weekly story missions. There's a ton of content in the season pass that we have to make. There's the expansion that we make every year or so, a little over a year this time, and then there's other things that we make within the game, and my kind of remit is to make sure that all of them have the right sort of product learnings from a consumer perspective. So we're sort of learning on them and building on them. I'm not a creative, and I don't tell the creators what to do ever. In fact, they tell me what they're going to make, and I just try to help them. The job is to help. The job is to make sure that they have the right eyes on the right data, and they're using that to make the right decisions. That's really it.
Okay, so if there was an up and coming studio, let's say in New Zealand, we'll make one up called Sugar Games, and at what point do you think that they might need a director of product management? Like, at what stage do you think the team requires kind of that level of care? Like how early on in a games or studio's journey do you think that role is required?
I think fundamentally it really depends on the kind of game you're making. Some games don't actually need this role. If your Sugar Games is making a small indie story-based game, just tell the best story you can. And make sure you're doing the best you can around it. I think work with your publishers or work with whoever you can to get the product out and make sure the business is sound. But eventually, if you're running a game with the community, you're going to need to straddle publishing as well as development at the same time, and the glue between the marketing and sales and community management and that sort of thing. And development tends to be something like a director of product management role. And I would say first and foremost, if you're trying to see when the best time is, my opinions vary. My opinion would be first and foremost is getting your gameplay loops right. Once you understand how the game plays, once you understand what the magic in the game really is, then you can have somebody come in and define the bounds of the product. Is it a free-to-play game? Is it going to be paid? What are we going to be selling? Are we going to have pay-to-win mechanics or not? My opinion, never do that. But like, people have different choices that they make. How are we going to present that to the players? How are we going to learn the best lessons from our players and respond to the community? That comes really after you've really nailed your core gameplay loop, and you kind of now have a sense of what this game is and where it could go, what you could do with it, And I think so. The stage really is after you kind of understand the kind of game you're making, and if you have an executive producer or a head of product of some sort that can help you give it shape, that's fine. If not, a director of product of that sort or a head of product can come in, give it shape, and help work with publishers and different aspects of the business to make sure it's a successful launch.
Right. So if there's someone just starting out in the industry right now, like what kind of skills do you think that someone that would want to work into a similar position that you're in, what kind of skills do you think that they should have or try and learn? Is there anything that you feel is kind of crucial to the role?
Yeah, I think product managers are often with a lot of responsibility, but very little authority. So you have to learn how to communicate and build relationships and bring people together and build that trust that when you say, hey, this is what our players really want, people believe in you, people believe that you've done the homework, and you're able to show that work too. Data analysis, being able to look at data closely and understand what that means for the player base, being able to run user experience tests with other players and see whether that resonates with them. A big part of the job is to be able to prognosticate what is presently a glint in someone's eye is going to resonate with your player base or not. And typically if it's a level, it's gray boxed. If it's a gameplay mechanic, it's buggy and it's just really early stages. Or if it's a new feature, it's very, very early. It's a PowerPoint deck that somebody just walks you through, or some UI mockups. You need to be able to look at that and prognosticate whether this is going to do to your community. And that comes with experience, but also comes with using the best of your data, your knowledge, your player base, being able to look at other games, play them regularly and see what it did for them, and build that community of friends who work at different places who can inform you better. It really is a job that is about building trust, not just with the people you make the games with, but also building trust within the community and being able to get input from everywhere else and trying to improve the game.
Totally. That's definitely my word of the day, prognosticate. Awesome. So yeah, this is a conversation. Just I work at Rockworks. We have about 65 employees working on a survival game, and it does feel there's about 5 production or 3 producers and like a couple production coordinators on the team, and there's this debate as to like who a game developer is, like who's this is just something I see often on Twitter, is like do production count as game developers, do QA count as game developers, and I imagine it like at companies like Bungie, where there's, whole product publishing departments that are quite separate from the actual development team. What is your opinion on that kind of conversation about who a game developer is and where that line is drawn?
Yeah, I have a very simple definition of it. Anybody who is part of the team that's making, just that is making the game is a game dev. QA are game dev, production's game dev. Community managers are game dev. All of them are game devs. The word developer sometimes connotates programmers only. So if you want to demarcate developers from artists, from QA people, sure. Then if you think that developers are synonymous with programmers, that's a different thing, but that's a function. But as often game developers is an umbrella term now that we use for everybody who works on the game. And really for me, anybody who's part of the team is part of the team. They're all game devs. Everybody's game devs.
I love games. I've tried to pursue like a programming career. I've realized that that's not the shape of my brain. I love communication. I love organization, and I've found like a love for production. And I'm happy that I can help facilitate the development of a game without feeling like I need to know my ones and zeros. But yeah, we're two producers talking about that, so maybe we need to expand the conversation and have some expand the debate, because I think we would both agree that we're considered developers. One thing about your careers working in as like a producer or an executive producer and a senior producer, what are some of the principles of good production practices that you think are important, or that you kind of take with you wherever you go, to see if the development team that you're working around is kind of functioning efficiently? Do you have any principles?
So actually, the thing that I've found interesting in my time in the industry is that producer means different things in different teams, and have different expectations. The core of the role is the same, but things change around what a producer really means, especially a producer is not a project manager. The project manager function is the development director stroke development manager function. And producers are more product owners. And as an example, at Ubisoft, producers are very much project managers. They're deep into the project, staff, people management is a big part of the job. The way I see it is there's three vectors that a producer tries to solve. One is people management. Often people management falls on producers. Different clever people have different opinions on it. My opinion's different from theirs, but yes, often in different studios they go to people management falls on the producers. So one of the vectors is people management. It may not be directly being their manager, but being able to marshal them, being able to inspire them, being able to tell them what they need to do and why they're doing that thing is extremely important. It's a great skill to have early on that you can build over time. The other vector that most people slot producers into, and is an important skill to have, is process management. And this is all your task management, time management, setting the right processes so things fall in place the right way, being able to, I'm going to use your word of the day again, prognosticate whether this feature is going to land in time, within budget. Are we going to go over budget already because this feature is ballooning and the scope is ballooning? Can we bring it back to scope and still keep the core of the experience there? That sort of thing. So that's all process management, really. And then the third is product management. Just being able to look at the product and see whether this is going to resonate with the audience. Are we making the right thing? Are we making the right choices? Is our UX easy to understand and lets players get into the flow state? Or is it going to be a detraction every time, or a distraction every time a player's touch this feature or touch this game? Being able to run studies, being able to look at data that's coming in from user research or consumer insights, and being able to decide which direction the feature should take. And also looking at a set of features and going, these are the standards that have been set by different games in our genre. as the things to be? Are we going to match them? Are we going to exceed those player expectations? Or are we going to just do the bare minimum here because it's not important to the core of what we're making? And getting the balance right is extremely important, right? You can't, no developer on earth can actually surpass player expectations on every single thing that you're doing, because no game is every single thing, right? Every game has a focus, has a soul.
So you have to make choices and sacrifices. Yeah,
exactly. Not telling the story, then the best voice acting is not. We know the voice acting standards have been set in the industry, but you don't have to match those. You're not telling the story. If you are telling a story and it's a particularly cinematic story, we know what the standards are today. We know we know the God of Wars and the Last of Us's and the Destinies of the world. And are you matching that level of storytelling, or are you not? Becomes a question. But even in the indie space, you look at like clever games like Life is Strange, or honestly, there's so much great narrative stuff that doesn't even rely on cutscenes these days. I can't even begin to name all.
Firewatch was a game I played recently that blew my mind. Firewatch,
absolutely brilliant, right? And the voice acting in that is extremely crucial, that they nailed the expression. So they knew that was that had to surpass player expectations. But if you're just reading an audio log in some other shooter, maybe that's not as important to you. Maybe it's that delivery is not as important to you. It really depends. But being able to see whether your features are going to exceed player expectations, meet them, and why, and being able to express that with the design team together. That's the product side of things, right? And a producer tends to be a mix of these three vectors, and depending on the company, you're expected to sort of over-index on one or two of these vectors. And depending on the company you're in, you get to exercise different muscles. But that's how I kind of summarize what a producer's journey looks like.
Totally, I love it, and I can definitely tell which one you're most passionate about as well. So in some smaller teams, I know that producers usually take on the responsibility of like publishing and distribution, kind of talking with the platforms. What kind of vector would you slot that kind of list of responsibilities into?
I'm not sure if I got the question. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, so like talking to the Apple App Store and making sure that it follows all the requirements and goes through the approval process, things like that.
Yeah, that's definitely the process management side of the producer. There are producers whose entire job sometimes is just managing the release management team. Or being able to oversee that we're checking all the boxes and getting through the TLCs, whether it's Apple App Store, or it's Sony or Xbox, there are cert requirements that everybody has, and being able to make sure that the cert requirements are met, or you have waivers for any of the cert requirements because of the nature of the game, you're going to not be able to fulfill. You already have waivers. The release date is set. Your relationship with Sony, Xbox, Apple, Google Play, whatever it is solid. They know the product that's incoming and the waivers that are in place and the special requirements your game needs. All of that sometimes is a producer's job, depending on the studio. And that's extremely important too. And that I slot in the sort of process management vector. It depends what the job is, really. Sometimes you become an art producer, or your job is to get the best art in front of the players, and you're not doing narrative, you're not managing a programming team or features team, you're just an art producer. But within that, there's process management, making sure the art is being developed the right way. You're not wasting any money, you're not wasting any effort, you're not wasting your team's time, and you're giving the right assets and providing the right assets at the right time, so the game development can function smoothly and nobody's waiting for your assets to kind of publish the next build or whatever. You're not breaking a build, things like that. So it really depends on what you're managing at any given point as a producer. But it's always process, people, product.
I love it. Yeah, it's nice and easy to remember and succinct. I'm probably going to use that one day in a talk, and I'll definitely credit you for it. That's awesome. So One question I just thought of. Oh yeah, so like I've spoken to a lot of indie devs as their team grows, and I've had experience working in teams around like 50 to 100 size like dev teams. What are the pain points? Because as you have more people in the mix, communication becomes much more important, and you need to like create more processes to communicate into different departments. Um, just from your experience working at some of the companies you have, what are some of the like bigger pain points that arise once you know double, triple, quadruple that number of people that are all working together on that one product? I'm just wondering if there's any insight you have that like how that evolves over time as a company grows.
Yeah, there's no real right answer to it. It really depends on people
Mm,
that exist within that company
mm,
and what the culture is amenable to, really.
mm,
And the reason I say that is because sometimes the solution is forcing more people to talk to each other, having more meetings so they are actually talking to each other. But sometimes an organization is very sort of meeting phobic and pushes back on too many meetings on people's time because people want to sit at their desks and actually do their work. So finding that balance becomes hard. It's not impossible. Everybody can
mhm,
find their own balance, but it's really finding ways of communicating the right thing. Sometimes some organizations are documentation heavy, so
mhm,
confluence pages of every single document. Some studios tend to be Slack heavy, like all the information is shared immediately on Slack.
mm,
Um, and people are collaborating naturally. It really depends on the cadence of your team. What a producer needs to do is to understand the dynamics at play and understand how a team communicates and likes to communicate and find the gaps. Right,
mm,
what is happening when I added 20 people to the team? Suddenly, this team's not talking to that team, or
mm,
these people are not sharing enough information. People are not inherently bad. Nobody wants to make a bad game, right? So when these things are happening, you have to understand the root dynamic of it. Is it because that team's just not used to getting feedback, or is it that team or those individuals are just not extroverted enough to share their
mhm.
stuff early on? What is the problem point? And then you try to solve it in a way that respects them as individuals, the team's dynamic, but also make sure that the communication's happening and
Yeah.
the communication breakdown isn't there. It really is a different problem when you're starting your own team. When you start at an indie place and you're starting your own company, you get to decide as a CEO or lead producer or whatever what the cadence of communication is going to be. And
Mm,
over time, as new people join, they change the dynamic and you kind of adjust to it. But if you join an existing team, often you have to find what is working and what isn't. Why
mhm.
are things failing, right? Why did the nightly build, when it failed, why did nobody learn about it? Oh, because we don't have an email that goes out clearly every time a build fails. So let's put that in place,
Yeah.
and now everybody will know the build. That kind of thing. So
Yeah.
you have to. My process sounds a little long-winded, and my answer definitely sounds I'm maybe punting on it. The reason I have for that is it really is respect the people who are making the game, respect their time,
Mhm,
make sure you're giving them the best process to be
mhm.
able to express their needs and their progress, but don't over index on it, because then you'll have the best process possible, but then you're not indexing on the people side of the problem.
Mhm.
And now people are just angry that they have to spend that much time watching Slack or that much time in meetings and not enough time doing work. So finding that balance for your own team and its own dynamic comes
Mhm.
from a place of respecting what that team's dynamic really is and being able to solve problems instead of creating new ones.
Totally. No, that's really really good advice, and you're right. There's no one problem fits all, but that's a really great like foundation. Just to respect the people, respect the developers, and see where that takes you on the journey of making better processes. You mentioned culture earlier, and I know you're a big advocate for diversity and diverse teams, and I'd love to know and just kind of pick your brain a bit as to if you could speak to other studios out there, what advice would you give for them if they want to kind of take a step deeper into becoming more diverse and inclusive in their organization? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think one of the first things you have to learn is that in the global economy, diversity pays dividends over time, right? Having different voices in the room at all times will make your game better, because you will avoid the pitfalls. Somebody will be able to point out, hey, that thing's really problematic, or hey, if you just do it this way, a bunch of people will love your game because for whatever reason. Diversity really has to reflect a diversity of thought, and that comes from diverse experiences that people have had. And to me, that is looking at where you are. So you can't say, hey, hire a bunch of people of color if your studio is based in, say, Africa. That's not the functional. You can just go, yeah, diversity, tick. You have to look around yourselves and see what is lacking, right? Do we have enough LGBTQ people that know what game we're making, or are able to talk to us and make us better as a studio, make our game better? Are we elevating enough voices so we're avoiding pitfalls? We're not, tone deaf. But also, honestly, just have so many friends from really diverse backgrounds. It makes you better as a person, just listening to different people. And I know I'm phrasing this as a responsibility of minorities to kind of make other people better, but that's not really the point. I'm trying to sell diversity to anybody who's listening, really. I think finding a seat at the table becomes easier for diverse people joining the industry when they see people in leadership who are also from different backgrounds. They're LGBTQIA+, they are people of color, they are they're disabled, or they are differently abled, or they're people of color. Like you can find a mix of leaders that is the right representation for your team, and that makes other people feel welcome and come and join your team. So it does really start at the top. I firmly believe, but also when young people from diverse backgrounds join your studio, make sure that they feel heard and they feel safe. Psychological safety is something that I advocate for wherever I go. Psychological safety is of paramount importance. It's not physical safety. It's not that, hey, unfortunately, that's where the bar is in our industry, where you should feel physically safe in any studio, that nobody's going to be untoward to you. But also you need to feel psychologically safe, that if I speak up or if I express myself fully, it will be welcome, right? I'm able to be myself fully. And that kind of comes from the culture that you set from the top. So it's not just hiring. Unfortunately, it's not just about opening up your entry-level hiring positions to anybody and trying to go for more diverse candidates. It's also top-down, trying to create a culture that's welcoming to everybody. And that starts with looking at your C-suite and going, hey, is it diverse enough? Looking at your director level positions and going, hey, is this diverse enough? Is it like a bunch of people of color and a bunch of white people, and like it's great, but at the same time it's all men. Is that good enough for us? No, it's not. You have to kind of look at it from all angles. Because one person's privilege is another person's lack of one, depending on context, right? So you have to kind of find that balance. And I firmly believe that we can get there as a medium, as an industry. I think we can let other voices make our games and make them better. But we have to start somewhere, and everybody has their part to play, I think.
Totally. I love it. I feel like you've definitely put a lot of thought into this, and that you are really passionate about it. One of my main takeaways that you just mentioned is diverse, making sure you have diverse thoughts inside the company. And I think as we continue this conversation, that we'll find out more people that have different types of thoughts, that could be added to the mix. That it's not just the color of your skin or where you were born. There's so many different factors that could have affected your upbringing, that could provide like a different perspective to those conversations. So that is really fascinating. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know it is hard to talk about that topic sometimes, but I do really appreciate you just kind of putting it out there.
One thing I very, very much wanted to mention was diversity of thought often is used by people that do not invest in diverse teams by saying that we have people from different backgrounds, but they all look the same.
Right.
And they all kind of have the same sexual orientation. They are all similarly able. And that's you not checking your privilege and just saying having people from different parts of the country or having people from different working class backgrounds is enough diversity. So that's sometimes is used as a cop out, and that's definitely not my intent here.
Okay. Thanks for challenging me on
diversity
that.
of thought, right? So diversity of thought comes from actual real diversity, actual real people of color, people from BAME backgrounds, LGBTQIA plus people. Everybody has some sort of privilege in the kind of society they're in, with the exception of some groups. Try and make sure that you're aware of your privilege. I'm a straight passing man. Like, I'm fully aware of my privilege, and I need to be. I need to educate myself on what my privileges are before I can speak to. I cannot speak for the experience that women have in this industry. I just simply cannot. And I think that's important. I cannot speak for trans people who are in this industry and are sometimes thriving, but like often struggling because they're not accepted, or their voices are not heard, or they're not allowed to tell the stories in their own voices. And I have to be aware of my own privilege, even though I'm a person of color, to make sure that I'm making room for them. And being aware of your own privilege is extremely important before you can start creating a team that has that diversity. And the diversity of thought is having all these different voices. That's what diversity of thought means. Diversity of thought would never be like, oh yeah, this person thinks differently. It's just an introvert versus an extrovert. That's old school thinking.
Yeah, no, you're right. Absolutely. I definitely need to continue on this journey of understanding my privilege and how that affects me on a daily basis, and how I can help others. So yeah, thank you for talking about that.
Of course.
I'd like to talk a bit more about. So you mentioned off the podcast that you're a big comic book nerd, and I'd love to know if that played a part in you kind of entering the games industry when you were younger, and what your biggest takeaways are from your childhood of reading comics.
Oh my God, yeah. It's gonna be, yeah. So let's just get into it. So yeah, I'm used to read a bunch of comic books as a kid, and I still do. I'm a big comic book fan, and I've seen the medium grow over time. A seminal comic book that everybody's read is, things like Watchmen. The thing about something like Watchmen or The Killing Joke, almost anything that Alan Moore has done, is that it's very specific to that medium, right? It is not a book brought to life with pictures. It is not a poem brought to life with pictures. It's not a picture book. It is a comic book. It can be told. It can only be told, that story, in those panels, the way they've been laid out. And that was an extremely eye-opening moment for me growing up. That showed me that you have to embrace the medium you're in, right? You really have to tell the stories the way this medium can really accentuate, to not be a facsimile of other things out there. And video games have that power. They've always had that power. This is a participatory medium, right? The audience participates. You take part in the story. You hold the controller and you nudge the player forward. And if you're not embracing your medium and kind of embracing the way this medium can either tell stories or give experiences or just create a playground for people to have fun, you're not doing your medium, service, but also, justice. And you're also not finding your true expression, really. If you'd rather be making a movie, then make a movie. If you'd rather be writing a book, then write a book. Games are so diverse these days, like just in the space. They inspire me daily, because these are people who are embracing the medium completely and making experiences nobody else can. And I think I'm not the first one to advocate for it. There's tons of people way smarter than me who are making way better games, and they're really truly embracing the medium, and I applaud all of them. But my journey started when I realized that video games have that power, and that I wanted to work in them and just really embrace the medium and be able to put my stamp on them. And that's where my journey started. That's how sort of comics informed who I am, really.
I love that. That's really, really powerful, and even makes sense within games as a medium. So you have, VR and AR and mobile, and it's the people that embrace the platforms that those games are being played on. That you have something like Superhot that wouldn't give you as much of an experience if it was on mobile. It's something that's almost built for VR and that platform. And that's a really great piece of advice, I think, for developers to be thinking about if it is something that can't easily be just ported over to another platform or another medium. If it is kind of rooted in that passion and using the way you're telling that story and giving that experience in a unique way. That's awesome.
Absolutely. I love that. Shout out to Superhot, by the way. It's absolutely one of my favorites. Such a brilliant game.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the games industry right now as well. Is there's so much innovation happening in every corner as technology develops and as people are thinking of new ways of using these tools. Is there anything that you're really excited about in the future of games, like the next iteration or breakthrough? Is there anywhere that you're kind of keeping your eye on and hoping that something kind of pops in an area?
I keep an eye on the indie game scene a lot.
Yeah.
Mostly because the level of creative expression and the level of innovation there is unparalleled. Because if they don't take risks, they could just be a facsimile of AAA games and thus actually kind of fall short. So they have to innovate. But also indie game studios, I find, are started by a bunch of people who really want to do something differently. And then they just go ahead and do it, right? And I really keep my eye out on that space, mostly because they're truly bringing innovation to the space. They're telling stories, they're expressing themselves in a way that a bunch of other games are not. And you can see that in breakout successes in the indie space every year, really. But also, I think a thing that I keep my eye on is technological sort of trends. A bunch of things that are happening at the same time that kind of there's a lot of consolidation happening in video games right now. A bunch of indie and like AAA developers getting bought out by bigger players in the market. A bunch of tech companies are getting into video games. Amazon has a bunch of studios. Google started off with Stadia and then stopped. But so it shows that video games are being seen even by tech companies and everybody else as a meaningful way of people spending their time, and thus they need to be in that space. Otherwise, they'll lose out on a bunch of what people do. And not be part of the cultural sort of zeitgeist of conversation anymore. So there's a lot of that happening that I keep an eye on. And streaming's a big one for me. I think I keep my eye on how streaming's progressing. Streaming movies and TV shows are now kind of standard. Nobody imagines their lives without Amazon Prime or Netflix. So can I drop brand names in this podcast?
Of course.
Can I just say absolutely. Netflix? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so nobody imagines their lives without your Netflixes or your Amazon Primes or Prime Videos or whatever, and they sort of realize that their next passion is also video games. Netflix just bought an indie games company,
nice studio,
or indie game studio. So there's a lot of consolidation happening, and streaming's going to play a major part in it. Xbox obviously has xCloud. Google still has the Stadia service. They don't have studios anymore, but they still have the Stadia service. PlayStation's had PS Now for a while now. Being able to access video games wherever you are on any device you are is a thing that's coming. How that plays out in the business space is going to be very interesting. In that if people are paying some amount of money every month to access a whole suite of video games, which is happening with Game Pass already, the value of each individual game is not important to the platform. What is important is how much time people spend on that platform, much like Netflix. And then how do indie developers or AAA developers or independent like Bungie, how do we sort of play in that market where instead of being able to sell a video game directly to a consumer, we have to be more engaging. We have to spend more time with our players. That kind of changes the dynamic a little bit, and then shifts it towards games that take more time, and that sometimes leads developers to artificially inflate the time that players spend in their games, and that's not always a good thing. Or you kind of try and, from a business perspective, you try and cut a deal early, like with Apple Arcade or any of these other platforms, where your presence on that platform guarantees a certain monetary benefit to your studio. It's a really interesting space. A lot of things are happening. A lot of things are happening. I don't know where this will go, but I'm keeping my eye on it, because it's extremely important for independent game companies to know where the wind's blowing, to be able to kind of address that market head on. And different technologies around, like AR and VR, I always keep my eye on. I think AR is on the cusp of breaking out. It hasn't yet, really, as it hasn't become as big scale as it could be potentially, but it's on the cusp of breaking out, is what I believe. So I'm keeping an eye on it as well.
Wow, yeah, you mentioned a bunch of just interesting topics that we could probably go deeper in all of them. But just the one thing I want to pick is like Netflix acquiring a studio. I'm interested to know, as we were talking about before, respecting the medium of games. I'm interested to know like what their perspective is going to be like if they're going to try and make like an interactive Netflix series, or if they're going to, respect games as a genre and appeal to to a different audience, or if they're going to try and bring games to their Netflix audience. It's definitely an interesting crossover that I'm curious to know how it's going to play out.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned how how passionate you are about indie games. Is there any like what is your where are your sources of like how you find these indie games? Like where do you frequent that you often find these like nuggets in the industry popping up?
Well, often on Game Pass. I think there's a ton of amazing stuff on Game Pass, but I keep my eye on like new releases on Steam and new releases anywhere. I just kind of have different blogs, different gaming websites that I follow that pay special attention to independent games. So I know what's coming out on a regular basis. I have a bunch of people on Twitter that I follow that constantly retweet out any little nugget that's been made, and I keep my eye on it, and I follow them back and make sure that I'm kind of keeping my eye on what's coming out, because it's just the sheer depth and dearth of quality, creatively satisfying games out there is overwhelming, as you have to keep on top of it.
Yeah, totally. Twitter's definitely been my main source, just the hashtag game dev or hashtag indie dev hashtag. There's some great, well, the thing is usually like a GIF goes viral where you see like a game that's in progress, so it's not really a playable game yet, but it's a teaser of a new game mechanic that's like, wow, this is so creative, this is so different, but then you have to wait 6 months to a year before there's something actually playable, but it's cool. There's definitely a cool community there. So we've only got a few minutes left on the podcast, and one question I just want to ask you is, I know recently you took a bit of a break from social media, from Twitter, and I just want to ask you, like, what was that like? How did that kind of change your perspective, or what did you kind of learn from that experience? Why did you take the break in the first place?
Well, I took a break because a bunch of personal things just kind of collided at the same time. COVID was going on. I'd left EA at the time. I was transitioning to my new job, and there were other things I had to consider. And it's kind of, at the time I knew I didn't have time or patience for social media, but I also actively wanted to. I could not post and I could not interact, but that would have been fine. But I took an active break. I got rid of the apps, and I just completely took a complete break from all of social media, and that kind of gave me time to focus on myself and focus on my thoughts. I think often what we find is when we have a little bit of downtime, when we can be alone with our thoughts, we tend to just gravitate towards social media and consume a bunch of what other people are saying and interacting with that bubble, instead of just sitting with our thoughts and using that to sort of formulate what you want to do next. And I wanted that time for myself, and I found it was really useful for me. Even now I've kind of dipped my toe but I'm not as active, mostly because I find letting down my thoughts and kind of letting. I'm sounding like a mindfulness nerd, but truly, I definitely believe in it. Just being mindful of your emotions and your thoughts, and using that to formulate your next steps is it's an extremely important skill that everybody should practice. And social media kind of detracts from it, for me anyway. I'm sure other people use it to the best of their ability, and I think that that break helped me really sort of get down to the brass tacks as far as where I was emotionally. And I definitely believe in emotional strength and being able to exercise your mind. People go to the gym. People should also go to therapy. It's exercise for your mind. If not, just exercise a little bit of mindfulness, shut off social media for a while, and that helps you develop yourself, your emotional core better. And I definitely believe in it. Nobody else has to. I do. And I think that using that as a vector, I tried to kind of turn that off and use that to improve myself.
I love it. I've just read a blog that's all about how much boredom can help you creatively, and just to organize your thoughts. And just like making yourself bored is so valuable that we don't really have enough nowadays because of how easy it is to consume content. So I'm definitely a big believer in that as well. If in games, just talking about games as a medium, I know they can be very. I've had like a period of my life where I felt addicted to games, where it's so easy to just kind of latch onto them and get kind of stuck in that game loop and like get caught up in it. And I think mindfulness is an interesting topic that we should talk about more as game developers and just people that are passionate about games as well. Just like as something to wrap up the podcast, what advice do you have for people that do want to become more mindful, whether they're game developers or whether they're just gamers in general? What would you tell them?
That's a big question. And this is a wrap up to the podcast too, so the pressure's on me. So I think for game developers, I think the huge thing is it's a stressful job. It ought not to be, but at the end of the day, it becomes one. And finding your center, knowing what you stand for yourself, is extremely important. What is your emotional truth is extremely important. And sometimes we lose our way. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we fall in a spiral. You need to be able to get out of it. Mindfulness is one way to do it. I think spending time with your thoughts, letting negative thoughts and negative emotions sit, getting okay with them, accepting them for what they are, not letting them affect you physically, and then letting them go it's an extremely important skill that comes with a little bit of mindfulness exercises or meditation. And I think it's an extremely useful skill. The games industry is a tough place for a bunch of people. Sadly, there are pockets of it that are extremely toxic for some people. And I think my advice can ring hollow for a lot of people who've gone through that or are presently going through harsh work environments. And so I don't mean to make light of it. It was my asterisk to what I just said. All I'm advocating for is being able to exercise your mind, being able to really get to terms with yourself is a skill that I've discovered in the pandemic, and I couldn't advocate it more for people in the games industry. Gamers, I think, come from all walks of life. Some people just play FIFA on their couch with their mates, and that's really it. And that kind of is. They don't dabble in that much of drama, but there are many gamers who feel extremely passionate about the games, about how much time they spend with the medium, how much time they spend consuming it, talking about it, expressing their opinions on it. The only advice I have really is it's at the end of the day, it's games, it's entertainment. I know it. Be kinder to yourself. It doesn't define you as a person. You're a fuller person than you imagine. Everybody is. It's just the games you play and the kind of games you're passionate about. It is important. I talked about how much I love comic books and how much I love video games. So clearly, they're part of my identity, but they're a part of me. I'm also a dad. You know, that's also a part of me. So be kinder to yourself. Games are not just the only thing. And if you find the games industry and the games drama getting to you, and I'm only so speaking to gamers, but or if you feel like you have invested too much emotionally, you need to take a step back and be kinder about yourself and your identity, and find joy in all the other things that make you who you are, to be able to manage your emotions around it, around video games better. And I think that's a skill everybody needs to have as a person. That's the best advice I can give. Really, I'm not really good at giving advice, but that's the best one I could do.
No, definitely. I now wish we had a bit more time to go deeper into it, but maybe we could have a whole mindfulness and games conversation at a later date.
Of course.
But thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
those points. I think there are some people out there that would really it would help for them to hear that. It is easy to get lost in community sometimes and things like that. So definitely thank you for touching on that. Really appreciate it. If anyone's interested in hearing more about Sam's journey, you can find him on Twitter at Serious Sam, and that's serious with a 3 instead of an E. And you can follow him on LinkedIn at Sam Sharma. And yeah, if you want to find out the kind of indie games that are on his radar, or find out the kind of work that he's doing at Bungie, or some mindfulness tips, I'm sure he can talk to you more about that if you want to reach out to him. So thank you so much, Sam, for your time today, and just sharing your knowledge from such a mountain peak, I feel, of game development that a lot of people strive to be one day. And it's nice to just peel back a bit of the inner workings and understanding a bit more of the context behind it, so that can help people in their journeys and what their ultimate career paths want to look like. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, most appreciated. Thank you for having me, and you've been a terrific host. I've been it was great talking to you, Carl. All the best to you and your podcast. This is brilliant. I love talking to you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I hope you learned something about game development, the games industry as a whole, or the future of games. You can follow us on Twitter at Zero to Play, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, or any other podcasting service. Other than that, you can find links to this episode down in the description below, and I'll see you guys next week for the next episode.